What if I told you that in 1973, an Oklahoma mechanic discovered a way to build a 550 horsepower engine using nothing but junkyard parts that cost $150? Not some exotic racing power plant, not some carefully engineered factory special, just leftover AMC parts that nobody wanted, assembled in a combination that the factory engineers never even considered. This is the story of how one man's curiosity turned American Motors Corporation's forgotten engines into dragstrip killers that embarrassed big block Chevys and Mopars, costing 10 times as much. Picture this. It's a Saturday afternoon at the Tulsa Raceway Park in 1973. A beat-up AMC Javelin rolls up to the starting line next to a pristine big block Camaro. The Chevy guys are laughing. They're running a professionally built 454 with aluminum heads, a tunnel ram intake, and about $8,000 worth of go-fast parts. The AMC? It looks like it was assembled from parts bin leftovers. The Christmas tree drops, and 12 seconds later, the Javelin crosses the finish line a full car length ahead. The Chevy owner demands to see what's under the hood, convinced he's been hustled by some kind of nitrous setup or hidden supercharger. What he finds instead is an engine that shouldn't exist, a 406 cubic inch AMC stroker that nobody at American Motors ever designed, built from a parts combination that cost less than his carburetor. This unlikely giant killer was the creation of Bill Kauffman, owner of Kauffman Racing in Oklahoma City. While the rest of the performance world was throwing money at custom crankshafts, exotic pistons, and expensive machine work, Kauffman was doing something different. He was measuring things. Specifically, he was measuring the stroke dimensions of every AMC crankshaft he could get his hands on. And what he discovered would revolutionize AMC performance and prove that sometimes the best engineering solutions come not from corporate R&D departments, but from guys with micrometers and an unwillingness to accept conventional wisdom. To understand why Kauffman's discovery was so revolutionary, we need to understand the state of AMC performance in the early 1970s. American Motors Corporation was the perpetual underdog of Detroit. While Ford, GM, and Chrysler were locked in the horsepower wars with massive big blocks and unlimited development budgets, AMC was trying to survive on a shoestring. Their biggest engine, the 401, was respectable but hardly earth-shattering. Making 330 horsepower in factory trim with a 4-barrel carburetor, it was adequate for muscle car duty, but couldn't touch the 450-plus horsepower monsters coming out of the Big Three. The performance aftermarket largely ignored AMC engines. While you could buy dozens of different cam profiles for a small block Chevy, finding a performance camshaft for an AMC 390 or 401 meant calling one of maybe 3 companies in the entire country. Custom pistons? Good luck. Aftermarket cylinder heads? Forget about it. If you wanted to go fast with an AMC engine, you basically had 2 options. Throw a bigger carburetor and headers at it and hope for the best, or spend massive money on custom parts that cost 3 times what similar Chevy parts would run. The conventional approach to building horsepower in 1973 was straightforward but expensive. You started with the biggest displacement engine you could find, then threw cubic dollars at it. Custom forged pistons ran $400 a set. A roller camshaft was another $600. Ported cylinder heads could easily hit $1,000. And if you really wanted to increase displacement beyond factory specifications, you needed a custom stroker crankshaft. These were the holy grail of engine building, billet steel crankshafts machined from scratch with longer stroke dimensions to increase displacement. A custom stroker crank for an AMC engine in 1973 would set you back at least $1,200, and that's if you could find someone willing to make one. But here's where Bill Kauffman's story takes an interesting turn. He wasn't originally trying to build a stroker engine. He was simply trying to fix a damaged 390 AMC engine from a wrecked 1969 Javelin. The car had been in a brutal front-end collision that cracked the block but left the rotating assembly intact. Kauffman needed a replacement block, but 390 blocks were getting scarce. However, 401 blocks from wrecked Matadors and Ambassadors were plentiful in Oklahoma junkyards. The bore size was identical at 4.165 inches, so theoretically, the 390 internals should drop right in. That's when Kauffman made his first discovery. While cleaning and measuring the 390 crankshaft, he noticed something odd. The stroke measured 3.574 inches, exactly as specified. But when he measured a 401 crankshaft he had lying around from another project, expecting to find the longer 3.680-inch stroke that gave the 401 its extra displacement, he realized something crucial. The main bearing journals were identical. The rod journals were identical. The only difference was that stroke, that extra tenth of an inch that made all the difference. Now here's where most people would have simply installed the 390 crank in the 401 block and called it a day. But Kauffman started thinking, if the cranks were essentially identical except for the stroke dimension, what would happen if you put the longer stroke 401 crank in a 390 block? The math was simple but compelling. A 4.165-inch bore multiplied by a 3.680-inch stroke multiplied by 8 cylinders equals 406 cubic inches. That's 16 more cubic inches than a stock 390, just from a simple crank swap. But displacement is just a number. The real question was whether this combination would actually work. Kauffman knew that increasing stroke without accounting for the changes in piston position could lead to disaster. The pistons might hit the cylinder heads at top dead center, the piston skirts might collide with the counterweights on the crankshaft, the connecting rods might hit the camshaft. There were a dozen ways this could go catastrophically wrong. So Kauffman did what any sensible engine builder would do. He measured everything. Using a deck height gauge, he determined that with the 401 crank installed, the pistons would actually sit 0.018 inches below the deck surface at top dead center, perfect for avoiding valve-to-piston contact while maintaining decent compression. The piston skirts cleared the counterweights by a comfortable margin. The rods missed the camshaft with room to spare. It was as if AMC had inadvertently designed these engines to be interchangeable, but never realized it. The first engine Kauffman built using this combination was conservative by his later standards. He used a stock 401 crankshaft from a 1972 Ambassador that cost $40 at a local junkyard. The 390 block came from a wrecked 1970 AMX and cost another $40. He had the block bored 0.030 inches over to clean up the cylinder walls, bringing displacement to 412 cubic inches. A set of forged TRW pistons designed for a 0.030 over 401 cost $90 from a local speed shop. The critical modification was using 390 connecting rods, which were 0.106 inches shorter than 401 rods, compensating for the longer stroke and keeping the piston height correct. For the cylinder heads, Kauffman performed what he called backyard porting, cleaning up the casting flash, matching the ports to the intake manifold, and performing a 3-angle valve job. Total cost for machine work, $60 at a local shop. He installed a crane camshaft with 0.525 inches of lift and 294 degrees of advertised duration, which cost $85. An Edelbrock aluminum intake manifold and Holley 750 CFM carburetor added another $200 to the build, though these were parts he already had on hand. The complete engine, including machine work and all new bearings and gaskets, cost less than $500 to build. Kauffman estimated that building the same displacement engine using a custom stroker crankshaft would have cost at least $2,000, and that's assuming you could find someone willing to make a stroker crank for an AMC engine in the first place. On the dyno, that first 412-inch stroker produced numbers that made Kauffman double-check his instruments. With no exotic parts, no radical camshaft, and no extensive headwork, the engine cranked out 485 horsepower at 5,800 RPM and a staggering 5 and 10 pound-feet of torque at 4,200 RPM. These were big block Chevrolet numbers from what was essentially a junkyard build. The torque curve was particularly impressive. The engine made over 450 pound-feet from 3,000 RPM all the way to 5,500 RPM, perfect for drag racing, where launching hard and pulling through the gears matters more than peak horsepower. But Kauffman wasn't satisfied. If a mild build could make 485 horsepower, what could this combination do with real performance parts? He started with compression ratio. The stock build ran about 9.8.1 compression, conservative enough to run on pump gas. By milling the heads 0.040 inches and using pop-up pistons, he could push compression to 11.5.1. This required race gas, but in bracket racing that was standard procedure anyway. The next area of improvement was the valve train. The stock AMC heads used relatively small valves, 2.02-inch intakes, and 1.68-inch exhausts. Kauffman discovered that the combustion chambers could be modified to accept larger 2.08-inch intake and 1.74-inch exhaust valves from a Chrysler 340. This required careful machine work to avoid breaking through into the water jackets, but the improvement in flow was substantial. On a flow bench, the modified heads flowed 265 CFM on the intake side at 0 to 500-inch lift, compared to about 210 CFM for stock heads. The camshaft selection was critical. Kauffman found that the AMC engine responded well to aggressive cam timing, particularly on the exhaust side. He worked with crane cams to develop a custom grind specifically for the stroker combination. The new cam featured 0.568-inch intake lift and 0.590-inch exhaust lift with 308 degrees of advertised duration. The lobe separation angle was ground at 108 degrees, tighter than typical to build cylinder pressure and improve throttle response. With these modifications, Kauffman's second-generation stroker was a completely different animal. Displacement remained at 412 cubic inches with the 0.032-inch overbore, but power output jumped to 545 horsepower at 6,200 RPM. Torque peaked at an incredible 525 pound-feet at 4,800 RPM. The engine pulled hard to 6,800 RPM, where Kauffman set the rev limiter to preserve the stock connecting rods. Remember, these were still factory AMC rods designed for a maximum of about 5,500 RPM in stock applications. The real test came at the dragstrip. Kauffman installed the engine in a 1970 AMC Javelin that had been set up for bracket racing. The car was far from optimal. It still ran the stock suspension, a production-based automatic transmission, and street tires. Weight was approximately 3,400 pounds, heavy by drag racing standards. Despite these handicaps, the Javelin turned in a best quarter-mile time of 11.84 seconds at 118 miles per hour. For comparison, a professionally built big block Camaro of similar weight typically ran mid-11s at about 120 miles per hour, but with easily double or triple the engine investment. Word of Kauffman's stroker combination spread quickly through the Midwest racing community. Within months, racers were scouring junkyards for 390 blocks and 401 cranks. The beauty of the combination was its accessibility. Unlike custom parts that required long lead times and deep pockets, anyone with basic engine building skills and access to a machine shop could duplicate Kauffman's results. The parts were hiding in plain sight in junkyards across America. The impact on AMC drag racing was immediate and profound. At the 1974 NHRA Division 4 points meet in Dallas, 3 of the top 5 cars in Superstock ran Kauffman-style stroker engines. The winning car, a 1969 AMX owned by Jerry Friedman, used a Ford 12-inch stroker to run 11.42 at 121 miles per hour, setting a new class record. What made this particularly impressive was that Friedman's entire engine build, including machine work, cost less than $800. Kauffman continued to refine the combination. He discovered that using a 401 block with the stock 401 crank, then boring it 0.060 inches over, created a 417 cubic inch combination that was even more robust than the 390 block version. The thicker cylinder walls of the 401 block better handled the increased bore size, and the longer 401 rods provided a better rod-to-stroke ratio for high RPM operation. This combination could safely rev to 7,200 RPM with proper valve springs and connecting rod bolts. The ultimate expression of Kauffman's stroker concept came in 1975. Using a 401 block bored 0.060 over, a carefully prepared 401 crank with the stroke increased to 3.750 inches through offset grinding and custom forged pistons, he built a 427 cubic inch AMC engine. This wasn't a junkyard build anymore. The offset grinding alone cost $300, and the custom pistons were another $400. But compared to the cost of a complete custom stroker kit, it was still a bargain. The 427 was built specifically for heads-up racing against big block Chevrolets and Chrysler Hemis. The compression ratio was pushed to 13.5.1, requiring 110 octane racing fuel. The cylinder heads received extensive porting work, with the intake ports enlarged and reshaped to flow 290 CFM at 0.600-inch lift. The camshaft was a solid roller design with 0.680-inch lift and 328 degrees of advertised duration. This was a race-only combination that required valve lash adjustments every few runs and wouldn't idle below 1,500 RPM. On the engine dyno, the 427 produced numbers that seemed impossible for an AMC engine: 625 horsepower at 6,800 RPM and 565 pound-feet of torque at 5,200 RPM. These were pro-stock numbers from what started as a passenger car engine. Installed in a lightened Javelin weighing 3,050 pounds, the 427 ran a best of 10.91 seconds at 127 miles per hour through the mufflers. With open headers and slicks, Kauffman estimated the car would run deep into the tens. But perhaps the most significant impact of Kauffman's discovery wasn't the racing success or the horsepower numbers. It was the democratization of AMC performance. Before the stroker combination became known, AMC racers were at a massive disadvantage. They couldn't buy parts off the shelf like Chevy racers could. They couldn't find machine shops familiar with their engines. They couldn't even find technical articles in magazines about building AMC power. Kauffman changed all that. He freely shared his combination with anyone who asked. He published detailed build sheets in regional racing newsletters. He even helped competitors source parts and set up their engines. His philosophy was simple. The more competitive AMC engines became, the more seriously the aftermarket would take them. And he was right. By 1976, companies like Crane, Edelbrock, and Holley were developing AMC-specific performance parts, largely because Kauffman had proven there was a market. The technical lessons from Kauffman's stroker were significant. First, it demonstrated that factory engineers don't always explore every possible combination of their own parts. AMC's engineering department had never considered mixing 390 and 401 components because they were developed as separate engine programs with different target markets. The 390 was conceived as a performance engine for Javelins and AMX-6, while the 401 was designed as a torque motor for large sedans and wagons. Nobody at AMC thought to interchange parts between them. Second, it showed that displacement really is a replacement for everything else. The 16 cubic inches gained by the stroker combination was worth approximately 35 horsepower and 40 pound-feet of torque, all else being equal. That's the equivalent of a camshaft upgrade, header installation, and intake manifold swap combined, but with better drivability and no loss of low-end torque. Third, it proved that creative parts matching could overcome budget limitations. While other racers were spending thousands on custom parts, Kauffman was achieving similar results with factory components that cost a fraction as much. This wasn't just about being cheap, it was about being smart. Why pay for a custom crankshaft when a factory piece would do the same job? The influence of Kauffman's discovery extended beyond drag racing. Street rodders began using the combination in everything from gremlins to matadors. The stroker's broad torque curve made it ideal for street performance, where drivability matters as much as peak power. A mild 406-inch stroker with 10.1 compression and a hydraulic cam could make 450 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque while still running on pump gas and idling smoothly enough for daily driving. The combination also found its way into circle track racing. The broad torque curve and relatively light weight of the AMC engine made it competitive in classes where rules limited displacement or required stock-appearing engines. Several Midwest dirt track champions in the mid-1970s ran Kauffman-style strokers, taking advantage of the combination's reliability and cost-effectiveness. Even AMC took notice, though they never officially acknowledged using Kauffman's discovery. In 1974, several factory-backed drag cars suddenly appeared with engines making suspiciously more power than stock 401s should produce. While AMC claimed these were specially tuned factory engines, insiders knew they were running stroker combinations very similar to what Kauffman had developed. The factory couldn't officially endorse using warranty-voiding modifications, but they weren't above using them in competition. The legacy of Kauffman's stroker extends to modern engine building. Today, stroker kits are commonplace for everything from small block Chevys to Honda four-cylinders. The concept of increasing displacement through stroke rather than bore is now standard practice. But in 1973, Kauffman was a pioneer, showing that sometimes the best performance solutions come not from engineering departments or aftermarket companies, but from individuals willing to question assumptions and measure things for themselves. The AMC 390-401 stroker combination remained popular throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s. Even as AMC ceased production of V8 engines in 1979, racers continued to build and campaign stroker motors using the dwindling supply of cores. Today, finding a rebuildable 390 block or 401 crank requires patience and deep pockets, as collectors have recognized their value. What once cost $40 in a junkyard now commands $500 or more on enthusiast forums. Modern technology has taken Kauffman's concept even further. CNC-machined billet crankshafts now allow stroker combinations that Kauffman could only dream of. Aftermarket blocks with thicker cylinder walls permit larger bores. Without reliability concerns, contemporary AMC stroker builds routinely exceed 500 cubic inches and 700 horsepower while maintaining street drivability. But they all trace their lineage back to that Oklahoma shop where Bill Kauffman first wondered what would happen if you mix parts that weren't supposed to go together. The cost-effectiveness that made Kauffman's combination so revolutionary remains relevant today. While a complete stroker kit for an AMC engine now costs around $3,000, that's still competitive with similar displacement increases for other engines. More importantly, the principle of creative parts matching that Kauffman pioneered continues to benefit budget-conscious builders. Whether it's using later model fuel injection on earlier engines or adapting transmissions across platforms, the spirit of innovation through experimentation lives on. But here's where it gets interesting. The real genius of Kauffman's discovery wasn't just the technical achievement, it was the mindset. While everyone else was looking at catalogs and price sheets, Kauffman was looking at the parts themselves. While others accepted that certain combinations were impossible, Kauffman asked, "Why not?" and then proved they were wrong. He didn't have a corporate R&D budget or sophisticated computer modeling. He had a micrometer, basic math skills, and the willingness to try something different. This is what makes the story of the AMC stroker so compelling beyond just the automotive world. It's a reminder that innovation doesn't always come from the expected sources. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from individuals working in small shops, questioning conventional wisdom, and solving problems through hands-on experimentation. Kauffman didn't set out to revolutionize AMC performance. He was just trying to fix a broken engine with the parts he had available. But by approaching the problem with curiosity, rather than accepting limitations, he discovered something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The technical elegance of the solution is worth appreciating. No exotic materials were required. No advanced manufacturing processes were needed. No proprietary technology was involved. Just factory parts, combined in a way the factory never intended. It's engineering at its purest, solving a problem with intelligence rather than resources. In an era where performance was increasingly becoming about who could spend the most money, Kauffman proved that ingenuity could still triumph over cubic dollars. Today, when we talk about disruptive innovation, we usually think of Silicon Valley startups or massive corporate research programs. But Kauffman's stroker is a perfect example of disruption from the grassroots level. He didn't just create a new product, he changed how an entire community thought about engine building. He proved that AMC engines weren't inherently inferior to the Big Three's offerings. They just needed someone to unlock their potential. The democratizing effect of his discovery can't be overstated. Before Kauffman, if you wanted to race an AMC, you either accepted being uncompetitive or spent fortune on custom parts. After Kauffman, any racer with basic mechanical skills and a few $100s could build a genuinely competitive engine. This leveled the playing field in a way that no amount of factory support or aftermarket development could have achieved. Consider the broader implications. How many other impossible combinations are sitting in junkyards and parts bins, waiting for someone curious enough to try them? How many performance limitations are actually knowledge limitations? How many expensive solutions could be replaced by creative applications of existing components? Kauffman's story suggests that the answers might surprise us. The Oklahoma mechanic who outsmarted AMC didn't do it through corporate espionage or reverse engineering or complex calculations. He did it by measuring things and asking, "What if?" He turned conventional wisdom on its head by proving that sometimes the best solution isn't the most expensive or complex one. Sometimes it's the one that's been there all along, waiting for someone to notice it. In the end, Bill Kauffman's legacy isn't measured in horsepower or quarter-mile times, though those were certainly impressive. It's measured in the countless racers who could suddenly afford to be competitive, in the aftermarket companies that started taking AMC seriously, and in the principle that innovation belongs to anyone willing to challenge assumptions. He proved that you don't need a massive budget or corporate backing to change an industry. Sometimes all you need is curiosity, basic tools, and the courage to try something everyone else says won't work. The AMC 390-401 stroker combination remains one of the most elegant solutions in hot rodding history, not because it was complex or revolutionary in concept, but because it was so simple that everyone else missed it. While others were trying to reinvent the wheel, Kauffman simply figured out that the wheels AMC had already built could be combined in ways their creators never imagined. And in doing so, he didn't just build faster engines. He proved that sometimes the best engineering solutions come not from adding complexity, but from seeing simplicity where others see limitations. What's your favorite example of grassroots innovation beating big budget engineering? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of automotive ingenuity that change the game.